Hi, everyone. Welcome to AngularUP Experience. This is super exciting to have you all here. We're about to start with our amazing talks. We have about 600 people attending online, so it's super, super exciting. So we have a lot of talks for you today. This is the English track. If you're watching this is the English track. You can also watch the Hebrew track. Just go back to your login screen and just click on Hebrew track if you want it. And before we go to the talks, first of all, I want you to know that you can ask the speakers questions if you have any using our Slack channel. You also have in our website, you have a community board where you can find your Slack channel, which has a general channel for everybody to just like chat about whatever you want and just network. And you also have an English track and a Hebrew track for the speakers where you can ask questions there during the talk themselves, and the speakers will actually see that. All our talks are live except for one, but because of time difference was a bit of an issue, but everything is live, so the speakers will see you. Another thing you can find on our community page is the Zoom links. We have 2 Zoom rooms where you can just chat with each other and just network with each other. And also we'll have the Q&A sessions with our speakers there in a more casual setting and not just like something like super, super official. Another really, really cool thing that we have is our unconference, which basically invites everybody to speak at the unconference and have fun and talk about whatever you want, as long as it, Angular, JavaScript related, or if you want to share maybe your little open source project or recruit people. That's what the unconference is for. So just fill the form on our website and just propose what you want. Our team will contact you and invite you to speak in our unconference. Another super, super cool thing that we have is we actually have a virtual scavenger hunt. So the virtual scavenger hunt is actually a little game that we have where we will show all kinds of like fun codes. For example, here's a code, Happy Sloth. Okay, so just look up all kinds of like little password that we scattered all over the website, the chat rooms, our Slack channel, and even during the talks themselves, sometimes you see like a little pop-up with a password. We just hit it in different kind of areas, especially our sponsor booth, which you should totally check out. And the goal is to find as many passwords. You'll always recognize them as something like with an animal name inside it. So just collect as many passwords as you want. Just write it down on a piece of paper or maybe an Excel, whatever sheets, whatever works for you. And at the end of the day, at the end of the conference on Thursday, we'll remind you, don't worry, just send a list of all the passwords you find, and the people who find the most passwords out there will win like really, really awesome prizes. For more information, also go on our website. You'll have at the top scavenger hunt. You'll find all the details in the form over there. It's really fun. Go for it. The prizes are really, really cool. What else I should tell you? First of all, I want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors that made this conference happen. A huge, huge thank you, especially to HiBob and to Next Insurance, which are our premium sponsors. You should totally check out their booth. They have amazing career opportunities. We have more sponsors, more job opportunities. Don't forget to check them out, especially to find those special keywords and passwords for our scavenger hunt. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. Let's see if she's online. We have Stanimira. Let's see where she is. There she is. Hi, how you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you just fine. You want to share your screen?
Perfect. Sure.
Awesome.
You should see my slides right now.
Yep, we see your slides. Awesome. So I'm going to go off the air, and I see you guys later. Have fun.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me over here, and thank you to everyone who is online right now, ready to watch this awesome conference. My topic today is custom ESLint roles with Angular schematics. And let's go to the next slide. My name is Stanimira Vueva. I'm a software engineer at VMware, and also a GDE for Angular. The best way to find me online is on Twitter. And today we will be talking about breaking changes. And one thing that we know for sure is that nobody enjoys breaking changes, honestly, because developers are paid to build new features in most cases and not to update to the latest version of any library. But as we can see in today's world of JavaScript libraries, and not only JavaScript, updating to latest doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't matter if you're an application developer or a library maintainer. You can also you have options to make updating to your latest version easy. And I want to promise you that after this talk, you will know how to make breaking changes painless. If you're a library maintainer, you will learn how to integrate the ng-update command so that your users can update to the latest version and execute migration scripts instead of migrating manually. And also, if you're an application developer, you will learn how to use ESLint to disallow any deprecated APIs and even migrate them yourself. So let's get started. The first piece of the puzzle is ESLint, as you can probably guess from the title. And ESLint is a JavaScript linter, which means that it analyzes your code and it finds problematic patterns. But enough here, let's see how it actually works. I have a very little project here that I really hope you can see. I have just a single file in this project. This is the index.js file. And I have a couple lines of code. And as you can see, there are some missing parts of the code or some stylistic problems, depending on anyone's opinion, of course. For instance, we don't have semicolons here, and we're also using the var variable. And because I have set up ESLint with a style guide that disallows the var variable and prefers using const, and also disallows omitting semicolons, when I execute ESLint, it is going to traverse this code and find these problems and report them back to me. ESLint is a dependency to the project. That's why I can execute the binary in the ESLint package using npx. I have to specify the source directory that I want to traverse. And when I execute this command, I get a bunch of errors, which is a good thing in this case. We want to see errors today. And as I told you, we get the no var rule firing, which says that I'm using var over here instead of let and const. And I also missing some semicolons. Another error that I get is that the variable b is assigned a value, but it's never used, as you can see. And these are quite easily fixable errors, but we can also have much more complex rules. The things that we see over here are called rules, and they're specific scripts that ESLint uses or applies onto your code to report errors. Another cool thing about ESLint is that I can execute it with the fix option. Let's see what happens if I do that. Well, first thing that is obvious is that we get less errors. And something else that we can see is that we have changes to our code. So ESLint executed some modifying scripts or migrations, as I'm gonna call them from now on. Let's see what are the differences. Well, we have semicolons. These are the fixes that ESLint executed for us. So we have a couple of different parts to ESLint. First of all, we have rules that are being applied to our code, and we get errors out of them. But each rule can also have a fixer. This means that whenever we apply the rule to our code, we get some fix applied. And today we're going to learn how to write our own rule with a fixer. And in order to do that, we have to understand a little bit how ESLint works under the hood. We have our source code, and ESLint runs that through a parser. In the default case for JavaScript, this is a parser called Esprit, and the parser produces a data structure called abstract syntax tree. This is how a specific example looks like. We have an import declaration. This is the source code that we have, and this is the abstract syntax tree that is being produced by the parser. As you can see, we have one root node, which is of type import declaration. The import declaration has some specifier, and for instance, a specifier is the search bar that we're trying to import, and the import declaration also has a source. And in this case, the source is UI search bar. As you can see, we have different nodes, and each node has its own type. And there is a specification for that you can totally find in Google. It's open source, but you don't have to learn them or know them by heart or anything like that. We have many tools that help us traverse and understand these abstract syntax trees that are being produced by the parser. So why do we need to understand them after all? Well, because ESLint applies rules using that abstract syntax tree. And the rules, as we saw, produce reports which can contain errors and also ways to fix these errors. And the cool thing about ESLint is that it is highly customizable. We can have custom rules that we're going to be writing today, and the custom rules can produce custom errors and also have a custom defined way to fix our code. And even the parser part of ESLint is customizable. So if you want to apply ESLint to a TypeScript project, we can use the TypeScript ESLint parser. And in our case, if we're writing Angular, this is the parser that we will want. But I mentioned TypeScript here. You might be wondering, why aren't we using TSLint instead? And the reason for that is that TSLint is deprecated in favor of ESLint. And most of the JavaScript ecosystem has migrated already. And if you're not there yet, so don't worry about it. It can be relatively easy depending on your current TSLint setup. But there is a guideline and ways to migrate from TSLint to ESLint. So in that spirit, we'll be using ESLint today instead of the deprecated library. And as I mentioned, we can write our own ESLint rules to detect deprecated APIs coming from libraries or coming from our internal applications. And we can also fix these deprecated APIs. And the other part of the presentation today is how are we going to apply these migrations out of the box. For instance, if we have a library that we're shipping to NPM and our library users that are installing it, how are they going to get these migrations without having to do any manual setup? Well, Angular is already doing that with the ngupdate command. As you know, when you execute ngupdate and provide it with Angular core and Angular CLI, this is going to update to the latest stable versions of the two libraries, and then it's going to execute some migration scripts that help you update to latest. Let's see that in action in case you haven't used the command. As you can see, we are installing packages from npm, and then we are executing some migration scripts. And our project is already ready to use, hopefully, with the latest version of Angular. And because the Angular team is quite thoughtful, they made the ngupdate command extensible. So we can use ngupdate for our own Angular libraries. And today I'm going to show you a little bit different approach. And this is how we can integrate an ESLint rule within ngupdate. So we're going to have both the best of both worlds. We're going to have ESLint whenever we want to manually execute that on our source code and have it report errors. And we're also going to have an ngupdate script that uses internally this ESLint rule to migrate any application that executes the ngupdate command. I basically told you that on the previous slide. So we're going to write an ESLint rule, and we're also going to integrate the rule inside ngupdate. And we need a deprecated API to migrate. This is a real-life example from a library that I used to work on called NativeScript. Any fans of NativeScript? Ooh, I can't hear you. Anyway, so before we had imports from UI search bar, and the new API is the, TNS Core Modules UI search bar. So basically, we have a very common scenario where a library deprecates some API, and it introduces a new API that should be used. And this can be considered a breaking change, of course, if the previous API is removed. So let's write an ESLint rule to migrate this API, right? And for that, I'm going to use a website called AST Explorer instead of a local setup, because you can very easily after this talk go on and try it on your own without having to do anything manually. And the AST Explorer is a very, very useful tool because it shows us our source code over here, and it also shows us an abstract syntax tree over here. So this is the result whenever the parser runs on our code. And as we can see, we have a single node that is an import declaration. And if we traverse it any further and select this part of the code over here, we're going to go to the specific type that just gets parsed into. And this is the source of the import declaration that is of type literal and has a value of UI search bar. All right. Just to mention that if you're trying this on your own afterwards, you have to select TypeScript ESLint parser if you want that rule to work with TypeScript. And over here is where we will be writing the rule. And this is the output whenever the rule is being run to our code. So what we want to get eventually is that we want this code over here to be fixed and have TNS core modules /UI/search bar. So how do we do that? This is essentially the rule, an empty rule. And this is a function that has some context and returns an object. And inside the object, we have to declare every single type of node that we want reversed. And in this case, of course, we can have many other statements that we don't want to traverse. We want to report only over here. And this is why we have to select any import declaration. And to do that, so the key of the this property should be import declaration. And the value is a function. And the function accepts a single argument, that is the node that is being traversed. And just to make sure that it works, let's just quickly walk the node. You can use the DevTools console, of course, and we have the node import declaration. If we look at the source, we can see that it's the exact same node that we want to traverse. And as you may guess, we are going to use the source to detect if this node should be traversed. So let's go to node.source. Sorry. And we will look for the value of the source and see if this equals UI search bar. And if we have a node like that, this means that this is a deprecated piece of code. We want to report an error. In order to do that, we use the context object and the report method on that object. And inside, we have to provide the problematic node. And for that, I'm going to provide the source. So this is going to be underlined by ESLint instead of the whole statement. So the node is node.source. And for a message, we can totally write anything that we want. For instance, importing from UI search bar is deprecated or disallowed. This is a little bit more ESLint-y way to say it. All right, so we can see here that when the rule is fired, we get an error at the exact same line of the code that we want. And we get an error that importing from UI search bar is disallowed. But this is not enough for us. We also want to fix that code. And in order to do that, we have to provide a fixer. A fixer is a function that takes a single argument called fixer, and it has to return something. And in this case, we want to use the replace text method on the fixer. The node that we want to replace is node.source. And because it's quite simple right now. We know that we have UI search bar. I'm just gonna copy this over, and I'm just gonna add TNS core modules UI search bar. And I get an error, and this is because I'm actually replacing it with a plain text and not a string. This is why I have to add quotes over here, and this is our migrated code. Of course, if we want to preserve the original quotes, there are other ways to do it, but we're just not going to get into that. You have to basically use the raw value and replace whatever you want to replace there, instead of modifying directly the value and adding your own quotes. But we did what we wanted. We have our deprecated API. Sorry. So we had our deprecated API, and we migrated that. You can find the code later. I have the more sophisticated version of this rule in a separate repo that you can see and use for your own projects. All right, how do we distribute this rule though? Well, the way to do it with ESLint is by using an ESLint plugin. And the ESLint plugins are distributed as nodes as NPM modules. And yeah, basically you just put custom ESLint rules inside and distribute as an NPM module. The name format for the plugin is ESLint plugin / the plugin of your the name of your plugin, or you can also have a scope. And in the case with NativeScript, we have ESLint plugin NativeScript, and the other option for a name is at NativeScript / ESLint plugin. And inside the plugin, of course, you're going to have your rules in rules directory, for instance, and you have to have a main file which exports these rules in the following fashion. So our rule is going to be called no short imports in a dash case, which is the default or recommended practice for naming ESLint rules. And if we want to use the plugin, you have to first add a few dependencies, the plugin itself, ESLint, and also the TypeScript parser if you want to use it in a TypeScript project. Then you need an ESLint configuration file that is quite short, so no worries about that. Here we specify the parser, a couple other stuff, and we also specify the plugin that we want to use, and the rule, and what kind of error it is going to give. So this can be either an error or a warning. So in this case, we want this to throw an error. And whenever we want to use it, we can just execute the ESLint command with extension TypeScript. If we want to traverse the TypeScript files more specifically, we want to traverse the source directory, and we also want the fix option. And let's see what happens when we do that on our project. So we execute it without fix, we get the error that we want. Then we execute it with fix, no errors, and we see that our code has been migrated. Cool. Now, how do we integrate that with ngupdate? And I'm not going to do any more live coding because I don't want to bore you from the start of this conference. So let's just get into some theory. Internally, ngupdate uses something called schematics. And this is a library for running project transformations. So for instance, we can have scaffolding files, updating files, or executing some tasks. And the Angular CLI uses schematics internally quite extensively. For instance, the ngGenerate command uses schematics to generate components, modules, services, and whatever you want. And because I said whatever you want, you can actually extend the ngGenerate, ngupdate command with your own schematics. So, for instance, you can have your own collection of components and use ngGenerate to generate them in the fashion that you want instead of generating the built-in components. ngadd is also a command that uses schematics internally. For instance, we have ngadd NativeScript schematics that installs the NativeScript package in your project, and it also executes installation schematics that are defined inside this library. And of course, ngupdate, as I've mentioned many times so far, also uses schematics. It updates to the latest stable version of the library, and it executes the migration scripts defined inside this library. So how do we make our Angular library ngupdatable? First, you need an ngupdate key inside your package.json. And this ngupdate key should have a migrations key that points to a migrations JSON file or some JSON file. The name is not that important. The migrations JSON file is a schema file that defines your migration scripts. And here we have just a single script that is going to be executed whenever we are updating from some version to version 002 or to a higher version. And the code for this migration is inside the factory. You don't have to remember all that. I'm just walking you through the setup. And inside this factory, we have something weird, a function that returns another function that returns a tree. And let's take a step back and learn some theoretical things about schematics. The most important concept in schematics is the tree. And the tree has a base, which is a virtual representation of our file system at the current moment, and actions. And these actions can do things that modify your files in that file system. For instance, we want to modify the package.json to add some package inside it, and we want to create a new file and other things like that. A rule is a function that takes a tree and returns another tree. And in this case, we have a tree with no actions, and the result is a tree with some actions. And the actions are going to be applied whenever the schematics script finishes. So we're accumulating them in this actions array, and then we are applying them in the end, which means that they're also reversible. If some action fails, the whole transaction is going to fail. So we're not going to end up with some broken project. And a rule factory is a function that returns a rule. And this is hence the name factory, because it's essentially a function that returns a function that takes a tree and returns another tree. And we can see that here. We have our rule that takes the tree and returns the tree, and we have our rule factory. And this is essentially where our migration is going to live. So first of all, how do we provide options to this schematic? Well, we have another key in the migration schema that points to another schema file, which basically contains the properties or the options that we can provide to our migration. And in this case, we have only the project, and this is going to be inserted by the Angular CLI whenever we execute the ngupdate command. So it is not something that our users should provide whenever using the migration. And in order to extract this project name, we use the options argument in the rule factory, and then we extract the project from these options. So far, so good. So how do we do stuff with schematics to modify our project? First, we can read files by using the tree read method. And this is going to return us a buffer, and this buffer is going to be converted to string. This is a function that we're going to be using throughout our migration. We can read directories by using the getDir method on the tree, and we get an object that we can basically use to traverse recursively every single path in this directory. So it is not an array of all the files or anything like that. We have a visit method that can be used to traverse each path. And in order to edit files, one way, the easiest way, honestly, to do it is by using the overwrite method. We have to provide the path to the file and the content that we want to insert there. All right, we want our schematic to do the following. First, we want to find the source directory of the project. In our scenario or the default Angular project, this is the src directory. Then we want to read all TypeScript and JavaScript files. And then we want to apply the ESLint rule to their content. And if there are any changes, we want to rewrite the files with the fixed content. So let's do that step by step. First, to find the source directory, one way to do it is to read the Angular JSON file, then parse its contents, and then just grab the project options from the workspace. Then how do we find the JavaScript or TypeScript files? Well, here's a little util functions to do that. First, we have the hasAllout extension helper function that checks if a path ends with TS or JS. Quite a simple way to find the TypeScript or JavaScript files. Then we get the source directory, and we visit every single path in this directory. And if that path has a TypeScript or JavaScript extension, we add it to a set. And finally, we return that set from the function. And finally, applying the row itself. First, we have to import a linter class from ESLint and instantiate that. Then we define the row that we need. Then we define the parser that we need. And then we run the verify and fix method through every single file that we want to fix. And we get the fixed content. How do we rewrite the files? Well, basically, we get every single file path that is TypeScript or JavaScript. We apply the rule to it, and then we check if the content is different from the original content. And if that's the case, we run 3.overwrite. And let's see how that looks like if we use ngupdate for our demo library with this migration script. First of all, of course, ngupdate is going to update to the latest version of this library. You can see the package.json file here being updated. It's going to run npm install, and then it's going to execute a migration. And as you can see, we have the exact same result that we had when we executed the ESLint rule. I'm not going to watch that to the end once again. So that was everything that I wanted to show you today. You can find all these examples in the links over here. The first link is a link to the presentation, which also has links to all the other examples. And if you want to talk to me, you can find me around or in Twitter. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great conference.
Whoops, looks like we lost her. I wonder why.
Here.
Oh, now she's back. Great.
Yeah.
Can you connect your screen again?
Yeah, sure.
Great.
Yep.
I'm on.
I'm actually finished, so that's why I stopped my screen share.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
That's okay.
Does anyone have questions maybe in the Slack channel? Maybe. Any questions in the Slack channel? Let's see. I see mostly, hey, what's up? Do you see the Slack channel yourself?
I don't think so. I think I have it, but I have to connect.
Great. So thank you so much for your talk. And we will see you guys and gals in a few minutes for Gleb's talk that should start in about 5 minutes. So see you in 5 minutes. Bye. Hey all, and welcome back. So now we will have a talk by Gleb from Cyprus. How you doing?
I'm excellent. How are you?
I'm great. Can you turn up your microphone just a little bit because I hear a little bit not so clear?
What about now?
Oh, a bit better. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
So everyone, this is a reminder that you can ask questions on our Slack channel. If you have any questions for Gleb, you will see it in the Slack channel. Maybe he won't have time to answer during the only 30-minute talk. I'm sure he has a lot of information, but he will definitely see your questions. And you can also meet him at the Zoom room afterwards. I will post also in the Slack channel when you can meet him. I'll also put like a little banner underneath here. So feel free to join us at the Zoom session. I'm going to share your screen now and have fun.
Thank you. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to my presentation, Testing Your Documentation Search. I'm Gleb Bakhmutov. I'm VP of Engineering at Cyprus.io. You can find me on Twitter. And thank you to the organizers of this conference for inviting me. Before I begin my main talk, I just want to remind everyone that we are on a path to pretty much civilization collapse if we don't stop runaway climate crisis. I personally believe survival is still possible if we do everything today. We can change our life, but more importantly, we have to join an organization and do it together. I'm sure that every country, every city has an organization working to solve climate crisis together. So I encourage you to find one today and do something. Okay, so in my talk, I'll talk about how you lose money. I'll talk about the funnel and all the ways the users drop out. And I'll show how a good documentation is very important to minimize the users dropping out in your business. I'll show how to set up a documentation search using Algolia, and then how to test the documentation search using AngularIO example. And I'll finish with a couple of tips and tricks. So let's start. You know, your business, no matter what you're selling online or as a software, is losing customers. And usually it's described in terms of a funnel. At the top, you have first-time visitors, people who just found about your company, maybe went online to find out what you're actually selling and if they can buy it. Now, some of those first-time visitors will be first-time users, not everyone, because not every visitor needs your tool, but some of them will try your tool. But only a subset of those first-time users will become repeat users. And even a smaller percentage will become paying customers, right? That's where you start making money. And at some point, the paying customers love your product so much, they'll become promoters. They'll say, I love this tool, you should try it. They'll become, give testimony to other people asking and actually spreading the word. Now, if you convert anywhere between 10 to 20% from users to customers, that's excellent. For any online tool, any software, converting even 10% or 20% is exceptionally good result. But imagine if you converted more customers, more visitors to customers. What will it do to your revenue? Well, you can convert all of them, and your revenue will not increase 5-10%. No, it will increase 5 to 10 times. But in order for you to convert every visitor and every user to a paying customer, you have to understand why the funnel is leaking, why you're losing potential customers. I think of this as two ways. Imagine first-time visitor comes to your website and says, well, I read about it. No, this tool doesn't do what I need, and that's fine. Maybe they say it doesn't work on my platform, and it's true. It's a valid reason. That's fine. No big deal. But what if a first-time visitor comes to your website, reads about the tool, and says, this tool doesn't do what I need, but it does do? Maybe they say it doesn't work on my platform, but it actually does. It's just your documentation wasn't clear. All those dropouts are for wrong reason. If a first-time user says, well, this tool doesn't run on CI, that's a valid reason if it doesn't run on CI. But if they ask and say, I don't know how to make this tool run on my CI, well, that's a wrong reason for dropping out. If a repeat user says, I cannot afford this tool, well, that's fine. That's a valid reason. But if a repeat user doesn't understand the value the tool brings and drops out and doesn't become a paying customer, that's a wrong reason. The same thing with paying customers not becoming promoters. If they're just happy that's fine. But if they don't know what else your tool can do, so they cannot recommend it to someone else, that's a wrong reason. Now, everything on the left, it's your market fit. It's features that I'm missing. Maybe there are bug fixes. That's fine. That's normal development. But everything on the right, all the wrong reasons, but they are due to bad user interface, bad documentation, maybe lack of examples. So we, as developers, want to drive this bad area on the right towards zero. And imagine you avoid all those dropouts. You could literally increase your revenue several times. Imagine what it will do to your company. If we talk about features like the left area versus documentation and UI and examples, which one do you think is easier or harder to do? In my personal opinion, fixing documentation is so much easier than actually adding features. I strongly believe that good documentation makes or breaks projects. You can have a successful project, but only if you have excellent documentation. And you can have an excellent product that fails in the market because no one knows how to use it. Okay, so imagine you want to improve your documentation. How do you go about it? The way you want to approach it is divide all the users of your documentation site into personas. Imagine there's a persona, first-time visitor, first-time user, repeat user, paying customer, and promoter. These are all different personas. So you try to optimize it for them. Every persona should have their questions answered. A first-time visitor might be asking, what does this tool do? Will it work for me? The trick there is to put hello world that kind of explains the main use case for your software right there, the first thing, right? So you don't lose those users. Another thing you want to do is answer questions for first-time user. How do I do X? How do I do Y? We usually create simple examples that show the main use cases for software right under hello world example. We're trying to predict what would first-time users do and answer those questions. A repeat user probably wants to do more. They need to do features. They need to know how to handle errors. They want to know how to run your tool using some platform. Right? So for repeat users, we don't put those examples like right there. Instead, we put links. So we create as many examples as possible. We try to describe them so users can find them and go there. A paying customer, same questions as repeat user, but probably wants paid support, maybe training, maybe wants to know what happens if there is an error, if I get stuck, is there help? So for those customers, we actually create recipes with larger real-world examples that try to show how to use the tool in a real-world scenario. And finally, promoters, your champions, they want to know when you're going to release a new tool. They want to suggest a feature. They want to know if there's training and webinars and things like that. You want to answer those questions as well. So the thing is, your documentation will keep growing and growing. In our Cypress docs, even the left navigation bar keeps expanding. We keep adding new guides and new reference points. An interesting trick to see how your documentation is doing is to look at your community chat channel. So in our case, it's Gitter. It could be Slack, could be Discord. We use Gitter. So we look at those questions, and I kind of sometimes look and I try to understand how many of those questions can be answered by our documentation. Because everyone here in this chat channel who doesn't know the answer is a failure of our documentation. And everyone asking questions is potentially opening a support issue, which costs us money, or probably a lost customer who got stuck and doesn't know how to do something, which potentially loses us money directly. You can kind of calculate your documentation miss percentage. Imagine all well-defined questions. And then take all the questions that are answered in your documentation and convert this ratio into percentage. Well, if it's less than 50, that means there are more questions that are not answered in your doc, so you should write more documentation. But if it's above 50, well, your documentation has a problem. Users cannot or do not know how to find answers in your docs. In general, You want the users to find answers to their own questions because you cannot scale yourself. If your product is successful and you have more users, you cannot answer all the questions again and again. You want them to find their own answers. Okay, so why can't users find the answers themselves? Why is good documentation hard? Well, unfortunately, all
I think you're on mute. For some reason, I think you're on mute. I can't hear you. I also see the little sign that says that you're on mute.
now?
Now we can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you for telling me. So imagine all these personas, they all want these questions answered first. But there is a contradiction. Do you show hello world example first, or do you show something advanced? Right? So all these requirements is in contradiction. In general, I suggest you optimize your documentation structure for beginners. Like hello world should be the first thing, because obviously there are more beginners than advanced users. And every advanced user at some point started as a beginner and successfully converted. So optimize your documentation structure for beginners, and then add all your documentation and make it searchable. So here's an example where in Cypress, no matter who you are, if you search our documentation, you'll find the answer. We kind of look at what questions would be asked by beginner, repeat user, power user, and so on, and the paying customer. So the search answers each one's questions. Here's how to create a good documentation search. I have an example that I describe in a blog post link here. It's just a little static site with 2 pages. And the first thing people ask, like, why do I need to create a search? Why do I need to use Algolia? Why can't I use usually a plugin that comes with many static site generators, right? And just creates a search plugin. The answer is all those static plugins, they only scrape headers. They don't search the main text and paragraphs. So they're all so underpowered as to be useless, in my opinion. What you really want to do is use something like Algolia. I'm not affiliated with Algolia. I'm just a happy user. The interesting thing is that Algolia captured pretty much 90% of open source JavaScript search market, so to speak. They give it.
Again, you're on mute. I'm sorry to bother you, but for some reason you keep muting.
Okay, I clicked unmute again. I don't know why it is happening. All my connections and wires seem to be fine. I apologize. I'll try to keep an eye. So Algolia gives generous plan, and they have documentation storage for pretty much every framework. So here's how you start with it. By the way, AngularIO also uses Algolia search. Okay, so you create Algolia app. It could be free, right? Every app has an index by default. You can scrape and use that index and verify that it actually gives you good results even before you put your widget on your website. The way you do it, that you deploy your site, your documentation site, your static site, and then you scrape it. And scraping throws away the old index and completely replaces it with new results. And this is how it should be, because you don't want the search to lead to old pages that are no longer there. And then you just create a search index widget, and Algolia provides a lot of SDKs for every framework. When you scrape, all you need is application ID and admin API key, and you should keep that private, that key, because it allows you to remove index and push new results. You don't want someone to find out and spam it. And to search the index, you use application ID again, and the public search-only, read-only API key. When you scrape the site, you just have to look at what you're scraping, okay? Because all the text has to go into the index. And the way you do that, you look at the structure of your page. You know, H1 is more important than H2. It's more important than a paragraph. And you write Algolia JSON config file that says, okay, Algolia, scrape starting from this URL, and your selectors are in order from level 0, the most important one, all the way to level 5, and then the text. So in this case, the least important thing is the text of each paragraph. When you scrape, you can use one of Algolia's Docker images. You just pass application ID, API key, and it just runs and crawls your website and grabs all the text and adds it to the index. For a real documentation search example, I have only 2 pages, 11 records are added. The interesting trick that you can do, if you create several documentation properties, let's say you have a main documentation site, and then you have your blog, you want to scrape the 2. And then maybe you have an example site, you want to scrape the 2. You can do it in a single Algolia config JSON file where you can define multiple starting URLs, and you can define separate selectors. So it will use one group of selectors for first site, another group of selectors for my blog, and another group of selectors for example site. The scraping is pretty fast. So we scrape all our properties. We create almost 21,000 records, and it takes exactly 2 minutes. So it's not a big deal to run it after every deploy. Okay, if you use Angular, Algolia has an Angular component. You just drop it into your site and set the API key. And then it manages all the markup for you. So when you search AngularIO, that's the markup that you see right here with different test results. Okay, we don't want to deploy the site, scrape it. We want to test this documentation search so we know it works. So here's a typical Cypress test. It can open Angular.io website, type testing. I assume there is something about testing, and then maybe check the results. So the way we do it, we visit the AngularIO website, we find the input box, and we type testing. And I call this blind test because we don't really know if testing is there, but we kind of see it there. So we say testing should be there, runs like this. Now we want to verify that there are search results columns. So we verify there are 6 of them. So they're all there. Then we verify that the CLI column is there, which it is. And then our test can say, hey, there should be at least 3 records there, and the test passes. I don't like this test. I think we should know what the search is doing, so we can open DevTools and the Network tab. We can see in a Network tab that there is search data request, which actually asks the index. This is the way AngularIO implements it. Interesting enough, under accessibility, you see some random commit SHA as one of the keywords. I don't know why it's there, but it is there. But once we look at that network call, we can grab the structure and we can say, using the new sci-intercept command, hey, anytime the app does search data request, intercept it and return the fixture file. And the fixture file just has a single result for testing. So in this case, when we type testing, we just see that result. We can verify that there is a single test result. We can click on it. And when we click, we verify that the URL actually changes so that our widget is working. Okay, so we end up at angular.io/CLI/test. Now, I've been rushing through lots of topics. I know it's a lot of content. I just want to take a little break and pause and say, here's how you run those tests on your continuous integration server. If you use GitHub Actions, which is really popular nowadays, you check out your code and you use Cypress.io GitHub Action. Okay, break is over. Our tests are running on CI. I don't like in my test the fact that I hard-coded everything. Right? I don't want this data to be in a JSON file and in my test. What I can do instead is to import the JSON object from the fixture file and just intercept and say, anytime there is a network request, here's an object, reply with. Right? Now I can type and everything from the JSON file. I mean, JSON object, like heading, words, title, and I don't have to hard code it in both places. The thing is, if I can load what I'm typing and verify things using a fixture, why can't I just get it from the network call, the actual network call that my live application is doing, fetching the search data JSON file? So Cypress intercept can intercept and stop the network call. That's what we've done before. Or it can just spy on a network call. You just don't provide a response. So we're spying on search data API call. We're giving it an alias. We visit the site. Right? We can see that we are spying. We can see that it has an alias, that the application made that call. And then we can grab that network request and grab its response body, which will be the giant list of things. We can find accessibility and Angular title in that long array. We check if it's an object. If for some reason accessibility in Angular is gone after some deploy, well, that test will fail. We'll know that we have to look at that. But that object has the same thing, heading, keywords, and so on. We can deconstruct that object and use it to type into our search box and verify when we click on the test result. And the whole test looks like this. You can see how the network took a couple seconds to fetch that search JSON, and now network request actually waited for that to finish before it actually grabbed the response object and typed. Okay, so I covered a lot of ground, and I want to finish with a couple of small tips and tricks. One thing that is kind of upsetting, that all the comments are usually not scraped. Like in this example, spy on any element, which is kind of interesting, right? I want to be able to find those code samples are not scraped. It's pretty easy to actually scrape it. For example, in my site, I have matching text using regular expression, and you can see that I can find it using the search. What you do is that you look at the structure of your document again. Usually the code comments have a class, in this case, comment. And if you want to scrape it, you just add them to your Algolia config. So in this case, when we scrape the text, we'll take all the paragraphs and list items and those comments. Nice trick. You can grab that selector. It's just a plain, document query all selector. Paste it in your DevTools and see what you're scraping live before it actually is scraped. So you can see if you are scraping the right parts of a page. In this case, we're scraping the paragraphs and we're scraping the comments. And as I hover, the DevTools highlights all the parts that will be scraped by the Algolia documentation scraper. Another thing that you really want to check is all the queries where Algolia says, I have no results. I don't know what to return to you. Because the users are typing this, but they have no answers. Even a free Algolia plan will send you a weekly email with top no results queries. So in this case, what do? Well, the users are asking those questions. They're typing it, they're trying to find an answer, and they have nothing. So you really want to just write documentation for those searches so that the next time a user has the same question, they get an answer. So searches with no results are pretty actionable. And another thing that I've done recently was, Algolia has an npm module. You can connect it to your terminal and write a utility where you can type part of a text, hit your index, display all the links, all the search results, and then the user can just select, and it opens a URL. So you can search your documentation right from your terminal without going to a browser to a specific page. Very, very quick. So I strongly believe that a good documentation is absolutely essential. Many projects were unsuccessful, not because we were technically bad or even did not have market fit, but I think because they didn't have good documentation that users could actually understand what was going on. Unfortunately, as I described, ideal documentation that satisfies every user at every stage in that funnel probably is impossible, because different personas want different results. And they want to be able to find those results quickly and not just going through a long documentation index. The good news is that you can create a big site with lots of text and lots of documentation and just have a good text search. Using Algolia is pretty simple. You can set it up in a couple hours and it will work wonders for you. But don't forget, you really want to test that documentation search to make sure it really is working and not silently broken. No user will tell you, I think your search is broken, because they don't know that. So you really want to make sure that the search really finds what you expect it to find and goes to the right page when the user clicks on the search result. Well, thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you to organizers. These slides are available, they're public, and this code example with tests against AngularIO documentation search is also a public repository. And I also suggest reading my blog post where I show how to create an Algolia app, how to set it up to scrape, and so on. If you want to ask me any questions, you can ask me on Twitter or in the Slack conference chat. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your talk. That was really great. So we can find you is the Zoom channel where? I had it written down somewhere. Let's see. So in one of our Zoom rooms, there's one in English and one in Hebrew. Obviously, you'll be the one in English. And you will be there, well, right now, actually. You can just go and join right now with the Zoom channel. You can find the links to the Zooms in our community page. And thank you so much again. And I will see you all in about 5 minutes in our next talk by Dimitri. Thank you so much again.
Take care.
תחילת הדרך. אנחנו משתמשים בבינה מלאכותית כדי להגדיר מחדש תחום שנחשב למיושן, משעמם, וממש משנים אותו. המוצרים שאנחנו מפתחים הם פשוטים, דיגיטליים, משתלמים ומותאמים במיוחד ללקוחות שלנו. יש לנו מאות אלפי לקוחות. עד היום גייסנו $631 מיליון, ושווי החברה מוערך בלמעלה מ$2 מיליארד. דאבל יוניקורן. אנחנו נמצאים בצמיחה מטורפת, מגייסים למגוון תפקידים בפיתוח, שעל הפרק תפקידי פיתוח אצלי בקבוצה של Software Engineering ו-Tech Lead. אני רוצה לנצל את ההזדמנות הזאת לספר לכם קצת על העבודה אצלנו, ואיך היא אולי קצת שונה ממה שאתם מכירים. המפתחים אצלנו הם האונרים הבלעדיים של העבודה, החל מהתנהלות מול מנהלי מוצר, כתיבת הקוד בטכנולוגיות הכי חדישות, העלאה לפרודקשן, אנחנו מעלים לפרודקשן מספר פעמים ביום. אין אצלנו QA, שזה יתרון אדיר בעיניי. אנחנו בעצם שומרי הסף, יש לנו אחריות מלאה וזו תחושה נהדרת. אנחנו עובדים באינטרוולים קטנים, משחררים לפרודקשן, לומדים ומשפרים. שורה תחתונה, האתגרים הטכנולוגיים הם מורכבים ואינסופיים. מעבר לעובדה שהצוותים אצלנו חזקים טכנולוגית ויש תמיד ממי ללמוד. יש גם מסלולי קידום וקריירה אמיתיים. אני יודעת שזה אולי קלישאה, אבל אני יכולה להעיד ממקור ראשון שזה באמת נכון, אצלנו זה עובד אחרת. להנהלה חשוב אישית שהמפתחים יוכלו לסלול לעצמם אפיקי קריירה בחברה. לא על הדרך, אלא בצורה מתוכננת. אנחנו כמנהלים נמדדים על זה. בנוסף, לכל עובד יש תקציב שנתי מכובד, להשתתף בקורסים, סדנאות, ללמוד ולהתמקצע. אפשר להזמין ספרים ללא הגבלה, כל דבר שנצטרך כדי ללמוד ולצמוח מקצועית ואישית. זה נמדד בכסף ובימי חופש על חשבון החברה. לא סתם נבחרנו לאחרונה לרשימת הסטארט-אפים שהכי טוב לעבוד בהם בישראל. אז עם כל מה שסיפרתי לכם נשמע מעניין, אני מזמינה אתכם ואתכן להעיף מבט במשרות הפתוחות שלנו. אנחנו מחפשים מפתחים ומפתחות, עצמאיים, יצירתיים, חכמים, ולא פחות חשוב שכיף לעבוד איתם. בקיצור, יוניקורן. אם יש לכם שאלות על משרות, אתם מוזמנים ליצור איתי קשר במייל, פה, בכתובת למעלה, מבטיחה לענות על הכל. אני מקווה שתמשיכו ליהנות מהכנס, שנתפגש בקרוב, ואם אתם רוצים להיות יוניקורן כמונו, בפעם הבאה ניפגש בנקסט. ביי ביי.
תודה רבה, זה היה המילים those were some words from our sponsors, premium sponsors actually, Next Insurance. Thank you so much for your humongous support in our conference, and we will see you all in a few minutes in Dimitri's talk. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I am sorry for the very awkward construction noises that I did not anticipate having right now. So let's join Dimitri to our discussion. Hi, how you doing?
Hello, awesome. And you?
Okay, just share your screen. Now, this is a reminder that you can join us in our Slack channels and ask questions. Even if he doesn't have time to ask them right now, then I'm sure he'll answer later in the Slack channel. And of course, don't forget our scavenger hunt. If you see those little passwords running around, don't forget to collect them. It's kind of like Pokemon. You got to catch them all. Enjoy your talk.
Thank you. So, folks, today we will discuss quite an interesting topic for me, which is composition API in AngularUP, because Ivy have opened the road for some quite interesting patterns. And I really suppose that's the next level of reusability for your application. A couple of words about me. I'm creator for Valor Software, several open source Angular libraries like NGX Bootstrap, was organized in NG Talks IO in 2018, Google Developer Expert, or you can find me as Valorkin everywhere. So we'll start with a problem introduction. Why components became huge? And we should know as a developer that the only persistent thing is change. We do our little shiny components which does one thing perfectly, and then real lives come in and starts to bring changes. Rarely given a time for a second thought, and eventually we have one another null do all component, unfortunately. Reusable components are a potential solution to this issue, but they face approximately the same fate eventually, but with less awareness of the application itself. The only thing which reusable components know is their inputs, their outputs, their behavior. And the worst part, if you need to develop a very similar thing, you end up with copy-pasting all of your code somewhere else. And taming application complexity is just not about Angular itself. Any framework, not necessarily Angular framework, has that issue. There are a lot of ways how you can tame an application complexity, but what's new in Angular world, it's not new in development world in general. So to clearly understand the need of composition approaches, we need to get an overview of existing patterns which we can use, their drawbacks and their positive sides. I want to especially highlight a thank you note for the Vue 3 composition API request for comments, which happened somewhere, I suppose, in 2018, early 2019. And that kind of ideas which was described there, I really like those and tried to apply it as much as I could in Angular world. And eventually, like that was more than a year ago, that got me to some interesting conclusion and patterns I'm currently using in Angular development. So before we going further, as any approach as a development need, first thing we should do is to clearly establish our requirements, right? So one of the most important requirements is readable code, right? So you're not working in isolation. Your teammates should be able to help on your code and continue your work. Code should be maintainable. Maintainable is how it's easy to fix or enhance your code. Obviously, small isolated parts is much easier to comprehend and change. Your code should be extendable. Not only your components, of course, should be extendable, but it should be easy to extend the features of your code and add additional or enhance already existing. If all of that sounds familiar to you, that there are pretty solid reason for that, which is called solid. Before going further, we should highlight several code reuse practices. Of course, there are more reuse practices which you may know or may use, But the main of those, which you can see 90, maybe 5% of the applications, of course, you can take that with a grain of salt. But base classes, services for sure, content projection, named slots, global state management, mixins, high order components, and of course, kind of composition API. As of mixins, a hardware component, that's a special topic which we should take a look a bit more, because everything else, most likely you already have seen, tried, or even used. But whatever we do, however we try to avoid, to not get in touch with the spaghetti monster, at some point of time, we eventually face in him in a real life or real code. So the mixins. Mixins is not a new pattern in general, but it became more easily to use it with Angular since Ivy. And what I currently see on the screen is rather mixin factory, which extends the class you have provided. At the bottom, you can see that some component extends with form check, and you can put inside of those brackets additional classes or additional mixins and change those in order to create your base mixin. As of other approaches, like you can use mixin factories, or you can use mixin helper function. Like you can see on this screen, mixture is a mixin helper function which helps me to join or unite several classes in one and then extend those as a based on mixture component. Of course, mixin has some really good pros and some drawbacks. Code, of course, are code organized by feature, and that's real good. Reduce repetitive code for sure, but has really bad drawbacks. React and Vue was populating for mixins for quite a while, but somewhere like 4 years ago, they started to acknowledge them as harmful and even added that to the official documentation that mixins is something which you should not use because of name conflicts, implicit properties, dependencies, and so on. High order components is a quite new topic. Unfortunately, that's not the easy thing to do because as you could see from a code sample, at least 2 parts here using tetas. If you'll take a look on the const original factory component type dot tetafag, that is access to the factory, which is a private API. And the next slide, you have Theta component factory, which is again private. That's nothing completely bad, but again, that means that you are dependent on some kind of private APIs, which could be not the case for some enterprise application developers. As an approach, high order components has a list of do's and don'ts. So what it should not do, should not create properties, should not add explicit dependencies or mutate the original component. The reason for it is why you should use high order components. The main idea of those is that you should be able to use your component in the same way as with high order components and the same way without. It should not block your component to work without high order components. Basically, you're not able to enhance or rather change the behavior of your component. You can rather enhance it in the way that components will not know about it. So those could be applied to one or many components, and that's mostly the things you should know about how do's and don'ts. If we switched about the positive part, of course, code organized by feature, and it heavily reduces repetitive code. On the drawbacks, obviously, not all the variables unfortunately following the best practices, and nothing forbids them to create properties. And that will lead to name conflicts same way as did mixins. Implicit properties and implicit dependencies. Unfortunately, because you will not be able to know about that from inside the component. And here we go to the interesting part is for me, the composition structure. Key motivations for Angular Composition API, which is kind API, that we are able to convert most of the drawbacks of existing approaches to the positive parts. How you're able to do explicit properties or dependencies, how you is able to reuse full or partial logic reuse from your services, for example, which you basically could do right now, but in a more explicit way. Of course, code organized by features and reduced boilerplate is one of the most important things, as for me. Component state should be static. What that means that you don't have observable subject or other things as a properties of your component. So basically, you don't have any async in your HTML. Some say that I'm really care about performance of your applications, and I really do, especially if you develop reusable components. Such thing which is themes not quite affecting performance on a scale could really kill it. So one of the things how you can start an approach, not even API, how you can start approach a composition of your things is how do you split them logically. So whenever you have one component, those components at any given time most likely have many mixed features implemented inside of the one component. And let's think about it and trying to split in logically independent parts, often versus rarely modified parts of your component, model logic versus view logic by removing some many nasty things from your HTML, which perform calculation or expression to the model itself or vice versa, and model versus platform logic. Let's take a look on several examples. That's my favorite one, maybe. This is material checkbox from Angular components, and it's only 500 lines of code. And that's actually one of the simplest components you can find there. And I honestly tried to make these screenshots pretty, but failed miserably, as you can see. But the good thing about it is that that was only an API part. That was only inputs and outputs. As you could guess, it's quite hard to comprehend what is written up there, not only for people who see this first time, but for maintainers too. Because there are a lot of things which they maybe even would love to not even see up there, right? Some parts they could cut off. But in order to start to move in that direction, let's speak about what is like your inputs, outputs, or other buildings are. So inputs and outputs, this is our promise to component consumers. Ideally, this is a clean and documented interface, some kind of a contract between our component and application developer, right? That's something we give outside. Let's try to take a look on this checkbox component under a different angle. We could see there an ID, which is HTML element ID and available for any component. Why not to split it into independent class? Then we can see quite a good thing for accessibility, which is area label attributes. And again, we most likely will ever change this part. Once written, it most likely will be never changed again. It's logically independent and could exist outside of the main component. This part is a web-specific thing. So input checkbox attributes, that's not something specific to material checkbox. That's something where documentation, you could even put a link to, for example, Mozilla documentation about input checkbox. And per folks, you will be able to find more examples or more understanding about what those properties do. Like if they say duplication of the code is a bad thing, replication of documentation sometimes not much better. So this thing, we are not even able, or should not, I would say, change API or names of these properties inputs, because they should be the same, should behave the same as a native input checkbox. As for platform-specific code, as any of you who was developing any kind of component which should integrate with a form, you should know what is control value accessor. This is a code which you will again write once and will never change again. But it will take maybe, it depends on your implementation, up to 30 lines of a code. For a checkbox, that's 10% of the code you see, plus comments, plus something else. And each time you want to change your component, you actually will take a look and you will see you will not be able to skip this part for sure. Why not to split it an independent class? And of course, real API, which we add on top of input checkbox, right? One optional field and a couple of outputs. That's what we really do. That's real, I would say, real API of material checkbox, which exists on top of anything else which already existed in HTML. And of course, the most nasty part, which you'll change most often, that's your properties or bindings to HTML. This is your work table. This is what you change, that's what you align, that's what you should see all the time. And of course, we can unite all of those nasty classes in one thing and be happy about it. Just joking. The other option how we could do that thing, again, using mixing helper function. And what is the difference, you say, between mixings and all the drawbacks you have showed before? The simple convention over configuration that you're mixing classes with static, or I would say synchronous properties, which doesn't have functionality. So even if one of the mixins will override the property of another one, the worst case you will have at compile time that those types of those properties cannot be assigned. That's it. That's some kind of a convention which makes your life easier. And as soon as we have an approach of not bringing functionality in those API classes, API definitions, as an entry point to our split of functionality, we don't bring any implicit dependency. We don't bring any implicit interactions. And it's really easy to use. So, for example, if you wish to develop a couple of components with real similar functionality, but a bit different API, you can mix as much as you want those parts of API, right? Known issues, which as an honest person, I have to mention to you that decorator instance not always works properly as for now, but there are workarounds, and there are, of course, directive hack, which you could see on some screens, but shouldn't worry about that too much because those hacks are used in Angular material. So if you use Angular material, you're already consuming those hacks and they're working fine for you. So that's fine. Before going too much deeper in this concept, we have now our entry point of splitting API by logical parts. Those are features we are planning to provide a functionality. Let's take a look on a couple of, I would say, essential things in order to make those split easier. And one of those is observable lifecycle events. In most cases, each lifecycle method will have a salad of invocations from several features implemented in that component, because they're available only as those methods, and if you need your feature needs some kind of action in that hook, you're limited to that method in your component. With observable lifecycle events, what you can do is wrap it around. You can see in constructor there are these enable hooks, which emulates some kind of a feature which want to listen for the hook itself. There are a couple of interesting parts here that, first of all, you're able to, of course, convert them to promise and simply wait for NG you need, then do some init function, set up your component properties, then you're able to wait for your after content in, and then again create something or subscribe. Interesting part about the subscribe, you don't even have to now create a not necessary property on your component, which is not a part of your external API. and you are able to use a local variable, and then you can wait for destroy event and just unsubscribe from that local property, right? So the good thing about it, which I like the most about the view composition and what they have, is this picture, which affected me real deep, and I had a real deep impression about it. So the simple idea of grouping features from spread across the component to some blocks which you're able to see and work with one feature at a time. You don't have to parse through several features in order to get to one of the methods which are mixed around your component. And observable lifecycle events is one of those things which allows you to flatten feature spaghetti and actually hook in one place to your for a feature thing. So the functional split, which is an interesting topic, and we'll briefly discuss some of the options we have for a functional split per feature. Intentionally have not put any kind of code here because there are two options which we should be able to understand without even any kind of code. First of all is a base class or a component itself which implement the behavior, right? Not a big deal. But for example, our autocomplete component in material is 1500 lines of code, which is quite a lot to go through and try to debug or trying to understand in which methods you actually have in your features. Sorry, had some outcomes of the flu last week. And obviously, with these components, it would be really hard to work. Other good options is services or services factory created through injection tokens, which allows you to create parts of like one feature, one service, one API. Sounds good to me. We'll get back to that later. Other topic which I have to mention, which is a real nice thing, which was released about 3 months ago, is Nginx component store. What interesting about that in Nginx Bootstrap, we're using similar approach for the last 3.5 years. The code base only 40 lines of code of RxJS, which allows us to use the same approach as component store. Highly recommend to take a look on it if you will not be able to even go through composition approach. Other thing to mention is ng effects, which is a one-to-one implementation or plus minus one-to-one implementation of view composition API itself, which I find at some time I found it that's very interesting. But as for now, I do understand that I would love to reduce the learning curve for a new approach as much as I can for new developers. Here we came to feature integrations, which is quite interesting thing because this is the heart of how you unite your model as a properties or parts of the API to actual implementation, for example, provided by services. While view option to unite part of the implementation as a pure function looks good for a view, we have a dependency injection, and we have all of the things for which we love or hate Angular, but they make our application much more configurable and much more dynamic at the runtime. And of course, as any task, there are some implementation requirements I see which is necessary to keep in mind that we should use minimal or zero private Angular API usage, performance, and of course, use case coverage, and something else could be to come. There are several reasons for your feature to provide methods for the component API surface. One of those is allow users to trigger an action from a component template. In this case, this method should be public and a part of your public API of a component. One of the things which is most annoying for a boilerplate, while you're able to cut the part of the feature into the service, you will still have all of the boilerplate connected to injecting those service usage inside of your methods. While the simple things like bind methods, you're able to do it as a one-liner. Other often use case, which you can see as get set and some kind of private property, is react to a property change from a template or on input, because if on change provides you a way to react on input change, most likely nobody used do check in order to check that property value has changed from template. Most people use setters. And there are, of course, some smaller, maybe even better way in some cases to provide those connections between your property and some kind of a setter. And again, all of this is around the idea that your feature setup has all necessary in order to make your feature working for this component. Next important thing is react to a change of an input. Whilst that could be a part of the component, having observable lifecycle events makes providing you an option to create actually some side effects inside of your services. Sorry. While you have helper methods for on change, you don't have to write again all of those if, else checks that the whole simple value changes actually contain the name of your property in order to call a function from a service. Sounds like a lot of repetitive boilerplate, which it is. You could do that with some functions which allow you to compose all of that in one feature initiation part rather than a lot of places. But all of that falls into more generic idea. One more thing last to have better understanding for the next real life examples I would love to say is a lot of boilerplates, and the thing which I don't really like is your async pipe and all related to it in your template, because HTML structure DOM at any given point of time is static, and we're trying to bring some kind of async behavior inside of it, right? And as soon as we try to connect fetching data from the backend or NGRX selector, which exist in async way, and we're trying to connect those to static properties which exist in HTML or in our component, we have to provide a lot of boilerplate code again, or use some helper functions which allows us to work with async behavior inside of the templates, which doesn't sound cool to me. So small helper methods could do a nice trick. But if we'll take a look on some more real life example, when we have an ID property which was changed from template or from the input, and we need to react on that part, that means that you will be able to connect and simply bind without any kind of additional behavior or without additional boilerplate, and you're able to register all of your necessary things for your feature behavior in one place. Real fast, we'll wrap it out. As a sample, chain a dropdown for a city selection, which is in most cases will look like this. Whenever you have around 9 properties, from 3 will be async and 3 methods, which again will be async. With View Composition API, it will look, I would say, a bit better because it's static and has computed properties on the board. While in Composition API for Angular, it will look even a bit simpler because your component extends the mixture of parts of the API on one hand, and on the other hand, you're able to set up those things in one place in 3 lines of code. Underneath the hood, that will look like that as soon as country name, your input value changes, you're able to trigger the fetching by name and bind that to some property, and all of that will be static at any given point of time. Really excited about that thing. I was planning to do even more about it this year, but 2020 was nice to all of us, I suppose. So plans have changed a bit. And to sum up this rush topic, because as you could understand, it's much bigger than 30 minutes could cover. Even if you are gonna try the thing, you should realize that you should not rush to use all the things. I prefer an approach when you make it work and make it pretty and doing one step at a time. Think about how this approach could change Angular CDK or your UI kit libraries or your reusable components, and how this change the way you test your components, because you're able to use part of the feature from a component, and that feature doesn't even know about the Angular itself. So that will work faster and it will be much easier to test. Hopefully you enjoyed this small bit of a presentation. As a final word, which I have a question. Yeah, that's work in progress. First thing, what I'm doing right now is I'm planning the thing to NGX Bootstrap, and as soon as it will be beta tested and ready for mass production, it will be released as a separate library, which will be consumed. As a reference list, you will be able to find the link to libraries and documents I was mentioning on the time of this presentation. Thank you for your attention. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your talk. If anyone wants to ask any questions, of course, you can also ask them in our Slack channel. This is also a reminder to look at the Slack channel to see the codes for the scavenger hunt and also at the Zoom links. So thank you so much, and good night to you.
Thank you so much for inviting. Have a nice day, everybody.
Pleasure. Thank you for taking part of this amazing conference. Bye.
Bye.
And I will see you all in 5 minutes or so for Malta's talk. See you soon. And welcome back. And now we have another talk by Marta. Hey, Marta, how you doing?
Hi.
This is another reminder that if you have any questions for Marta, you can also ask her in the Slack channel. Even if she doesn't have time to answer during the slot that she has allocated for the talk, she will definitely be able to answer your questions later. And keep an eye out for those codes for the scavenger hunt. And of course, don't remember in between talks to visit our sponsor booth, especially Hi Bob and Next Insurance, our amazing premium sponsors. Let me just share your screen. And here we go. Enjoy.
Thanks. Hi, guys. My name is Marta, and I'm super excited to be a part of this conference. And today I will help you to supercharge your developer experience in Angular. I will present you top 10 tools loved by Angular developers that will help you to build your apps faster for less effort, that are mainly open source projects that will increase your productivity at work. As you probably know, our life of developers is quite complicated. And we have good and bad moments, and the knowledge about proper tools you can use is crucial for us. And today I will present you tools that will make your life easier, that will make days at work full of positive feelings, and you will stop wasting your time on things that can be done automatically. Now let me introduce myself. My name is Marta Wiśniewska. I'm from Poland. I am Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies. I love open source, Angular, progressive web apps, and I co-create open source project called PWFire. If you want to start your journey with progressive web apps, just check it out. I love all things about tech. I also love coffee, sport, and community. If you will have any questions after the presentation, or you want to be updated with Angular or progressive web apps, you can find me on Twitter. And before I selected the top 10, I was considering what are my tasks as a developer. And it's quite obvious that people think that developers write code. But implementation is not the only one our responsibility, because in our daily habits, we also should select proper solution for your projects. We should select proper architecture, libraries, dependencies, and so on. We also should make sure that our app will be reusable and scalable. We should take care about app performance to create fast apps, and also keep proper code style to create good quality products that will be easy to maintain in the future. So we need tools that will help you with implementation, but we also should focus on other, for example, to easier setup environment and to configure your project, tools for testing, for debugging, for building and deployment process, and also for documentation. And based on these areas, on these puzzles, I created these top 10 tools. And today I will show you how you can start with these tools and what are the main features. Let's get started with the most powerful, I think. This is Angular CLI. If you use Angular, you probably know that is the most meaningful. This is command line interface. And I told you that this is the most powerful because, as you can see, for each of these areas, you're able to use some commands that help you automate these processes. Like, for example, for implementation, you're able to use ng-generate command, ng-add, ng-run, lint. You can find some commands that will help you to build and deploy your app with specific options like ng-serve, ng-build, and ng-deploy. Some useful commands for testing, for end-to-end tests, and for running unit tests. Also for the documentation and for environment setup and configuration. And this is how you can start your work with Angular. You can use npm install command and just install Angular CLI. And because, as you can see, you can find a lot of useful commands. I highly recommend you to type ng-help, and then you will find the short description about all of these commands. And today I don't have time to describe you all of that, but I will tell you about two. And first one, this is, I think I use the most. And the second is that I have never used, but I found it when I was preparing this presentation, and it's quite interesting, and maybe it will be useful for you as well. So the first command that you probably know if you're Angular developer is ng-generate. And on the left side, you can see elements that you're possible to create with this command, and you probably use it in your daily work. This is, for example, component, service, directive, interface, pipe, guard, module, interceptor, and enum. But I am not sure that you also have other options that are maybe not some common, like, for example, the app shell for the server-side app. You can also generate a new basic app definition in project subfolder, also service worker, web worker, a new generic library. And the second command that I want to tell you a bit is ngdoc. So I have never used it before, but it's a great option to display documentation for specific queries, specific element you want to find in Angular documentation. So let's say that you want to get some infos about component. Then you can type ngdoc component inside your console log, and then you will get browsers open in Angular documentation for this component. And the second option is when you use flag search, then you will get results for the search. So it's a really nice option if you want to find something really quickly. Let's go to the tool number 2, NX DevTools. I call it Angular CLI on steroids because it uses Angular CLI. It's great for monorepos fans, and you can use it with Angular, but also with other frameworks. It's toolkit for monorepo development, and it has great integration with other modern, let's say, tools, like for testing with Jest and Cypress, but also with TypeScript, Prettier, and so on. And it's built on Angular CLI, so basically it can do the same task like Angular CLI, but it's faster. Because it uses a computation cache, so it doesn't need to rebuild the same code twice. And you should to try it, especially if you're a full stack developer, because you're able to share your both apps, front-end and back-end app that are in the same repo. And this is the quick start for Angular for this tool. I highly recommend you to visit this page, then you will see the full instruction. But basically the setup is based on one command. You can type npx create nx workspace, and then you will generate a new workspace that is great for Angular with testing for end-to-end tests for your new projects. And this is how it works in practice. So let's say that we have our new project. We type this command, this npx create nx workspace. So this is a quick setup. This is installed. We have to type workspace name. You have to select frameworks. In our case, it will be Angular. You have to type application name. Set style sheet format, also default linter. And if you want to use NX Cloud, there's also option for you. So if you run it, it will be finished. Then you will also get a link to the full tutorial and also to the documentation for Angular. And if you open the created files, then you will see two apps. This is basic Angular app and also directory for end-to-end testing. Next tool is great because one of the most common issue if you're Angular developer is upgrading your project from one Angular to other version. And Angular Update Guide gives you a set of instructions how you can do that easily. And it considers app complexity, and package manager you use, is it npm or yarn, and also other dependencies like Angular material. And this is the official link where you can find this tool, update.angular.io. And let's take a look how it works. So let's say that we have our app in one version of Angular, then you want to update it to the 11. You have to type the app complexity. Of course, if you have more dependencies, it will be more difficult. We will select other dependencies that it is Angular material. And this is the to-do list that you have to do before updating, during the update, or after the update. And of course, if you have more dependencies, it will be more challenging and it will be longer to do that. And regarding dependencies, it's also problematic if you're talking about Angular, because one thing, this is upgrading, and the second problem, this is web performance. And this is a package that allows you to find unused, outdated dependencies in your project. So you can simply install it with npm install command with the name for this package. This is npm check, and then you can use it typing npm check. And this is how it works in one of the Angular projects. So we are in the workspace. You can see the package.json and with all dependencies that I use in this project. I have installed these dependencies. This is npm check. It's checking registers and all my packages. And here you can see the result. This is the list with not used or outdated dependencies. And it's cool because you also get instructions how you can update your version, which one is the highest you should use, and also remove unnecessary dependencies that also have huge impact on, let's say, on performance and the complexity of your app. Let's talk about the tool that will help you with debugging, because sometimes it might be annoying. So this is Agri. This is a browser extension that allows you to debug and profile Angular apps. It's possible to use in Chrome and Mozilla Firefox, and you can use apps that are in debug mode because you will use developer tools. And it will present the application structure, change detection, and also some characteristics that allows you to analyze your app and find potential errors. This is how you can use it, how to add to your browser. This is the main page, agriwrangle.io. You have to add it as a regular extension for your browser, run your app in debug mode, then open developer tools, and you're ready to debug. So let's take a look. This is the official page of this tool. You have a few options to add it to your browser, a few buttons, and then you will be redirected to Chrome Web Store reviews, Chrome. And if you need more description, this is the overview for this tool. And if you will debug your app, you will see two additional tabs in developer tools. It will be component tree and router tree. And you're able to verify all nodes inside this tree. You can check states and all properties for the selected node and selected tree. And also to check injector graph, the component hierarchy, how your components are connected. The second tab, router tree, so you're able to analyze all routes and paths inside your app, and also check metadata for each of these routes. Next tool, Storybook. It allows you to create components in isolated environment. This is CLI tool, kind of playground for UI components, that is a set of stories for your components. And each story represents visual state of your component. This is open source, and it's great to collaborate and to reuse components in multiple projects. And there is a great integration with the second tool I presented you today. This is NX. And you can install it automatically with the only one command that is presented on the screen. But also, if you have a problem with that, for example, because of Angular version, then you can do the manual setup. Then you have to install all dependencies. This is Storybook, but also you have to install Babel core and Babel loader. You have to add additional script to your package.json to make it easier to run it, and then create 2 configuration files. The first one, this is for JavaScript, and the second is for TypeScript. If this setup is successful, then you're ready to write stories for components. And today I will present you an example for stories for a button, and in this case you can see that this is for the button that will display emoji inside. So we will describe all visual states that we will want to apply into this button. So in this case, you can see that we have the button with emoji, but also other cases that is only text and that have some actions, handle some events. And if your story is ready, then you can run it with npm run storybook command and just open it in a browser. And this is how it looks like, the user interface. So we have our created button with stories that we wrote. And Storybook allows you to interactively design, develop, and test component in isolation. And this is great if you want to prototype components, and it's learn you to don't use too many dependencies in your project. So it's really cool. The second tool allows you to build scalable and reusable components. This is bit.dev. This is CLI tool. And for me, this is a great directory with ready-to-use components. So for example, if you're looking for components without a specific design, but with some features, you can easily reuse it and customize it on your own. This is great for cross-project integrations and easy to collaborate. You can easily share your components in different projects and also inside your team, for example. And basic option is for free, but if you need more features, then you need to pay some money. And this is the official page. So if you want to use it, you have to register, and you're able to use your GitHub account, or you can just register with regular registration with your email address. And this is the case that you're looking for a component that you want to use in your app, for example, for a spinner in Angular. Then you can use this search. You can set some filters, like, for example, your dependencies, the size you want to have in your app, and any other options. And then select solution that it will be useful in your project you want to use. And if you click on the specific solution, then you will get the overview, the source code of this component, also dependencies, and instructions how to import it with npm, yarn, or bit. So one case is that you want to use components, but also you can share your components. And in this example, I will show you how you can create collection, because we will export our components for collection, and you can collaborate with your team, but also just share it with the community, so make this collection public. And this tool works with Angular, but also with other frameworks. So you have to choose your project's environment, and then you will get the full instructions how to initialize Bit on your project. And it works a bit like a Git, and you have to initialize it, and we'll track components, track changes for the components you created. Then you have to configure your build step, set a version to control and to track your components you wrote, and then you're ready to export this component. Now it's time for tools for speed, packages and library that allows you to improve web performance of your Angular apps. And today I will focus on the NGX loadable and NGX quickling, but also it's good to know about Hero Loader and Guest.js. And Hero Loader provides code splitting on the components level, so it works in similar way like NGX loadable. But Guest.js, this is data-driven prefetching. So based on users' behaviors and tracking these behaviors data, you're able to prefetch your app to improve the performance of your app. And it works with Angular, but also with a JavaScript solution and JavaScript app. So the first, NGX loadable. Well, now in Angular, it's possible to lazy load modules. But from practical perspective, each route tends to have a lot of different commands. And we also want to apply lazy loading on the components level. And that's why we want to use NGX loadable. This solution overrides the complex implementation of code splitting into a simple API and consists of lazy loading component that works like regular Angular component, and also loadable service that allows you to lazy load modules. And a component can be used to control the loading of one module and display different states like loading, error, timeout, and so on. And this is how you can apply it into your Angular project. So you should apply the ng-add command, ngx loadable. You should generate the lazy loaded module with ng-generate. And here you can see how you can apply it into your code. So this is what I told you before, that this is just like a regular component in Angular. And NGX quickling, that provides prefetching strategy for the Angular router. And let's say that users use your app, and the router uses preloading strategy and automatically downloads the lazy loaded modules that are associated with the visible links on the screen. And you can install it with npm install with the name NGX quickling. And to use it, you have to import it in app module. And if you want to read more, this is a link to GitHub. Oops, sorry. And then you can find also a full source code. Next tool will help you improve your code style. It's basically inspired by Angular guide style. And it provides a set of tailslint rules. It is a static analysis for Angular projects that allows you to write consistent code and help you to discover potential errors. It's easy to use with Angular CLI. It supports Angular CLI, and you can use it with the only one command, ng-lint. And this is how it works in practice. So let's say that you have some code. We can see some warnings and some hints how to improve your code that will be better in style. And basically the CodeLyzer can process TypeScript, template expressions, inline styles, and here you can see links and also links how to, with the explanation, what should be done and what's the reference to this better style. And the last tool is great if you need documentation for your project, but you don't want to write it and create on your own, because Compodoc allows you to generate the full documentation for your projects based on your file structure. It's open source and it's local, so you don't need to use external server. You can use it locally. It's possible to use via NPM, and it includes search engine, so you can easily search for some queries inside this documentation. And this is how you can set up this tool with npm install command. It's good to add scripts to package JSON and then run it with npm run Compodoc. And this is the example for really awesome Pokemon's app I created. So as you can see, if you run this command, you will see inside your workspace a new folder. This is documentation with the full generated documentation for your project. And this is how it looks in a browser. So you will get the full overview of your app with components, modules, services, and so on. You will see also all dependencies with version for these dependencies, list of modules, interfaces, and also the full tree of your roots. So as you can see, with the only one command, without your effort, you're able to generate the documentation for your Angular project. Let's sum up. Today I presented you top tools that it's good to know if you're an Angular developer. I told you about Angular CLI, NX DevTools, Angular Update Guide, npm check, Agri, Storybook, bit.dev, some packages to improve the speed of your apps, also about CodeLyzer and Compodoc. I told you only a bit about these tools, but I highly recommend you to try it and play much more if you need it. And also, if you have any tools that will be useful for Angular developers, let me know. And that's all from my side. Thanks for having me. If you have any questions, I am free to answer. And have a nice programming day full of positive feelings like this with your new tools. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for your talk. That was awesome. So again, everyone, if you have any questions, you can also ask in the Slack channel. You can also join our Zoom community rooms. And thank you again so much for being a part of AngularUP Experience. Bye, Malta.
Thanks, bye.
And I will see everyone in about 5 minutes for Talia's talk. So thank you so much for joining us so far. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And now we are ready for our next talk by Talia. Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Wow, it's so like daylight out there where you're at, and already it's deep into the evening right here, so it's so dark outside.
Yeah, I'm in LA, so it's like 10:30 in the morning now.
Oh, nice. Okay, so I'm sharing your screen now.
Cool.
And another reminder for everyone, if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the Slack channel. And don't forget to keep an eye out for those clues for the scavenger hunt. And of course, if you haven't visited our sponsor booths yet, please do so, because we also have some cool job opportunities and some little Easter eggs there inside for a scavenger hunt. So enjoy the talk.
Cool. So I'm Talia. I'm a developer advocate at Split. And before I was a developer advocate, I used to be a test engineer, and I worked in QA and automation and testing for a while. And being a test engineer was really hard because most of the problems that I had revolved around staging and using like this dummy environment. And most companies use a staging environment to test. And it would cause so many issues. And these are some of the problems that I've dealt with that I'm sure you guys have also dealt with. So the first is data mismatch. So the data in staging does not match the data in production, which means the test results don't always match, right? And as a test engineer, I used to work so hard on testing every product requirement. I used to go through all the documentation with the product owner, and I worked with the developers to fix all the bugs, and I made sure my end-to-end tests were passing. And then I would sign off on the feature, and as soon as it's launched to production, there would be a bug. And it's such a horrible feeling as an engineer when there's all this pressure on you to make sure that this feature works in a dummy environment. The other issue is configuration drift. So let's say you get paged one night because there's an incident for your application, and you look at the logs and you identify the problem. But in order to fix it, you have to update a specific configuration in production. So you make the change in production and then you go back to sleep because it's in the middle of the night. But even though you fixed the issue, you've just created an even bigger divide between your staging and production environments because you didn't make the same change in your staging environment. So many times staging environments are not the same as production because of changes made during incident management. And this is called configuration drift. So I thought, what's the point of testing and staging if it's not going to give me the same test results as production? There's also really bad performance in staging. So a lot of times when you're writing tests in staging, you often have to add waits and sleeps because things take longer to load. And that's not how users are going to interact with your features in prod. They're not going to wait 10 seconds for a button to appear and then click on it and then wait 10 seconds for something else to appear. Like that's not how users are going to interact with your features. Also, nobody cares if staging is down. So I would be assigned to fix these hotfix tickets, which were just critical bug fixes that needed to be immediately released to production. So I would log into staging to test it, but staging would be down, so then you ping the DevOps guy, and he tells me they're doing performance testing in staging, so I have to wait until that's done. And then I try logging in again after that, but this time I get the 404 screen of death, so I open an IT ticket, and then I have to get it escalated by my manager, but she's at lunch, so I have to ping someone else. And meanwhile, all I'm trying to do is test this high priority ticket, and nobody seems to care. So I was so fed up with dealing with just a really bad staging environment and being blamed for when things didn't work. And as an engineer, any type of engineer, if you're a front-end engineer, back-end engineer, test engineer, you're constantly looked at as if you build the feature, you got to make sure it works. If you wrote the test, you got to make sure it works in production. So you're kind of the gatekeeper of these features. And I thought there has to be a better way to test software because my users are not going to use staging to log in. They're going to use production to log in. So I did a ton of homework and I researched what other companies are doing. And this is what I learned. So it's the norm for companies to use staging environments, especially companies that are still waterfall. And most companies also have more than one staging environment. Also, big name companies like Google, Facebook, Netflix, Twitter, like all of them test in production. And when I read this, I was so confused. I was like, what do you mean test in production? What is that? How is that possible? And so testing in production means testing your features in the environment where your features will live in. And I thought, wow, this is perfect. And this solves the problems that I have with my staging environment. I also learned that testing in prod doesn't mean you only test in prod. You still use staging for GDPR and SOX compliance stuff, things that are related to like data and privacy issues, you can still use staging for. And I thought I have to start doing this. So I looked into the how, like how is this possible? And the answer was feature flags. So feature flags are a way to separate code deployment from feature release. So the idea is you deploy your code to production behind a feature flag, test it in prod, and then release the feature with the click of a button as soon as it's bug-free. And this is kind of what it looks like in my head. So our developers would create a feature flag from the UI, so whatever feature flagging system you're using, and then target all of your internal teammates. So this includes dev, QA, product, design. So anything related to the feature can only be seen by the users that are inside of the feature flag because the default for the flag is off right now. So the people on the right, the real end users, can't see anything related to the features because they're not targeted. And so when the feature flag is off, you go in and you test everything. You test all the functionality, you test your design, you go through all the requirements, you just make sure that everything works. And if you happen to find a bug in your new feature, it has no impact on your end users because they don't have access to it. Again, they're not targeted. And then once you know your feature is working in production, you turn the flag on, already knowing 100% that your features are working in production and you didn't break anything that was existing. And now your users are happy and they're dancing because they have a perfect feature. And I thought that's all wonderful. Like this is a great process, but how do you automate it? Like you can't possibly manually test every feature every time you release. And with feature flags, you have this added complexity. So how do you automate it? And there's two ways here. There's two options for automation. So the first is to target your test users and automate the flows with them. So every time automation bot A logs in, they have access to the feature regardless because they are on the whitelist for this feature. So then you would take automation bot A and target that inside of the feature flag and run your automation scripts with automation bot A. And the only problem with this is that there's increased fragility because think about if someone removes automation bot A from that list, then all of your tests are going to fail. So you just have to watch out for your management of your feature flags and your management of your automation bots. The other option is to override your feature flag. So you would make a custom feature flag abstraction, which makes it easy to mock out in your test. So for each feature, you would have 3 tests. So in the first test, you simulate your feature flag on. And so for this test duration, if you get any request asking if the feature flag is on from the test, you say yes. In the second test, you simulate the feature flag is off. And if any requests come in from the test asking if the feature flag is on, you say no. And in the last test, you want to validate that you can go through the entire flow regardless of if the flag is on or off. So with this approach, you're really explicit in the test, and the test becomes much more self-documenting and descriptive. So whenever any test runs in a system under test using feature flags, you would fake out all the variants of the experiment. And because it's fake, you reduce the complexity of the different scenarios, which means faster tests. So basically what you're doing is you're declaratively setting the state of the flag for the duration of the test. And then when you run these tests in production, you want to make sure that your tests only interact with other testing entities in production. So what you do is you have this back-end flagging system in production. So something like a Boolean that's set to is test equals true or is test user equals true. Something that differentiates your real users and your real test objects from your test objects. So And this way you can separate test data from real data in your data dashboard. So if you have a bunch of flows running in production and some of them are test flows and some of them are real flows, if you have these identifying characteristics, then in your data dashboard in Looker or Datadog, whatever you're using, you can say everything with is test is true. You're going to be in this bucket. In this dashboard, everything with is test is false. You're going to be over here where my product people and the people who don't need to see what the tests are doing can see over here. And so the tests are looking for these specific elements with these specific test attributes in production. And if the test doesn't find it, it's going to fail and you're going to get alerted. So you can use ARIA labels. You can use just some other like data QA, data attributes for this. You have a few options here. There are exceptions when you run these in production. So if your software is integrated with a third party, it can be tricky to test. So something that works for third parties is to create a unique header in the API request that you send to the third party and say, hey, any request that you get with this header is a test, and I want you to treat it this other way. So sometimes you have to make these exceptions because of different variants in production. So besides feature flags, there are some other dependencies that you need. So the first one is an automation framework. It's not scalable to manually test everything in production. So you just want to make sure that you have some sort of automation framework in place. You also need a job scheduler. So something that's going to run your tests every night, every incrementally, however often you decide, just something that you don't have to think about when you're going to run your tests. And then an alerting tool to be alerted when a test fails. So these are the recommended tools that I've used for testing in prod. So for feature flagging, Split is great. An automation framework, I love Robot Framework. I love Robot Framework. It's so easy to use. There's a keyword-driven library that just makes it super user-friendly. For job schedulers, Jenkins, Circle CI, I don't really have a preference. And then alerting, PagerDuty, Slack. Okay, so this new process makes total sense to me, but if it's so simple, why isn't everyone testing in production? Why do staging environments still exist if you have this process that solves all of your problems? So the reason is that people are scared. So companies don't test in production because of this fear and lack of trust in their systems, and for the same reason, they refuse to engage in the tools and process changes that will generate that trust. So they're too afraid of the risks. And there's a few things you can do to mitigate the risks of testing in prod. The first one is, like I said, use feature flags before you launch. So target your teammates, test with them, and then turn on the feature when you know it's working in prod. You can also use a canary release, which is also called a percentage rollout. So this allows you to release your feature to a small subset of users before you roll it out to your entire user base. Just in case something goes wrong, you would only affect a smaller percentage of your user base. And then start with an AA test. So this means you give both sets of users in and out of the feature flag the same experience. And you can also just start small. Don't start out with the most complex flow and decide to test that in prod. Start with something simple. And so the outcome of this process is that you can release faster. You will have increased developer velocity because you spend more time creating new features and less time fixing bugs. You also have a really great confidence in your releases because you already know your features are working in the environment that they will live in, not a dummy environment. And you also have increased team happiness because it's just a really great thing for engineering culture when you're testing in prod. And if I haven't convinced you that this is a good idea, I want everyone to think of the last feature that your team deployed. You're thinking about it. Okay. Is it working? Right now? In production? How do you know? Your users haven't reported anything to you. Your alarms haven't gone off. So you don't actually know, right? Testing in production is the only way to know that your features are working right now in production. And it does require a culture shift. And a lot of times shifting your company's testing culture is the hardest part of this process. So a good idea is to use examples from your past when you're talking to your peers about this. Like, is your staging environment unreliable? I can tell you for a fact, yes, it is. And then if you haven't used feature flags before, go to split.io. You can create a free developer account and just start messing around with feature flags if you haven't used them yet. And in case you haven't been paying attention at all for the past 15 minutes, I want you to take away two things. So the first is that no one cares if your feature is working in staging. We care if it works in production. And the only way to know if it's working in prod is to test it in prod. Again, this is my contact information, my Twitter, my email. If you guys have questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can tweet me or email me. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming and being a part of this conference. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Thank you. You too, Noor.
If you have any questions, of course, you can still ask in the Slack channel, and of course, message directly on Twitter. It's also awesome. Okay, I'm removing your screen now. And thank you, Tyler. I'm guessing good morning to you and not good night.
Thank you.
Bye. And everyone, I will see you in about 4 minutes actually, in our next talk by Jennifer. Thank you so much. And welcome back from our very short break. Thank you so much for sticking with us till now. Okay, so we have another talk for today with Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. Oh, I love the great design behind you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's also really good for Zoom calls and stuff. It focuses on your face. It's really nice. Okay, so I'm going to share your screen now.
Cool.
And remember, everyone, that you can ask questions in the Slack channels. You can also join the Zoom channels. And yeah, have fun and keep an eye out for those scavenger hunt codes. Oh, hi.
All right. Really excited to be here with you all today. I hope you're having a great conference so far. I know a lot of these speakers are putting out some really great content. I wish I wasn't working half the day and just got to listen. But for the next 15 minutes, I want to take you on a little adventure through the hidden secrets of the Angular Forms API. A little bit about me. My name is Jennifer Wadella. You can follow me on Twitter at @OMG@Sveti. I'm the director of Angular development at a consulting company called Batovi. I'm an Angular GDE. I would definitely consider myself an Angular archaeologist, going and exploring scary Angular code bases and a discoverer of API mysteries, the things that just aren't quite spelled out in the docs. And that leads us to what we're going to be doing on our adventure, which is discovering the hidden secrets of the Reactive Forms API. This is all there in the code base, so it's just learning how to explore the code base and really understand and make sense of everything and what they mean. Because a lot of times when we're developing, this is what happens, is we have a feature to build, and so we're like, okay, how do I get as quickly as I can from point A to point B? And what that means is we're writing code as quickly as we can, and we're not necessarily taking time to really explore and understand the technology that we're working with, or some things that might not be available. And so it's kind of like we have one half of a medallion, and we're reading the instructions, and we're only getting part of the information, and that might lead us to the wrong end result. So by equipping ourselves with having a really good understanding of the Forms API, we can make sure that we're getting from point A to point B the best way possible with the most robust knowledge and able to solve some pretty tricky situations. So if we dig into the Reactive Forms module, by importing this into our root app module, we discover a lot of treasures that are just there and ready for our taking. One of the things we get are built-in validators. You might not be aware that whenever you're dealing with form validation, you're going to have email validators available to you. Validators for checkboxes, a max length and a min length validator, and both patterns and required validators. So those are all built-in treasures ready for us to use. We also have value accessor directives. So these are the directives that are built that are basically bridging that gap between our DOM elements that we're creating, whether it's an input or a checkbox or a select, and linking those to our actual reactive form controls that we're creating. We have status directives. So if you've ever noticed that you get those nice classes that let you know what's going on with your form elements, whether it's an invalid form element, whether it hasn't been touched yet, you notice those classes are getting added on your DOM elements. The ng control status directive is what's doing that. So we get all these built-in directives that are handling that functionality for us. We get form control directives. We've got our form array name. We've got our form control directive, our form control name. These are all different utility directives that we can use to bind to elements in the DOM and get the kind of behavior that we want without having to write a lot of things from scratch. In form development, we run into a lot of advanced form scenarios that can be really difficult to deal with. And so my goal for this talk is to really explore the API so you have a good understanding of how to tackle any form scenario that you might run across just by using the built-in functionality that you may not have realized was even there. We can do things like changing input requiredness depending on the state of other inputs. We can handle custom validation. We can handle adding and removing inputs dynamically. We can also deal with creating custom reusable form elements. If we are, for instance, having an address block that we want to repeat a lot and use throughout our application, how can we create and abstract that out with our forms without having to do a lot of messy code? We can deal with consuming third-party libraries or web components. I know a lot of people have kind of moved to building in their own design systems, and especially if they're dealing with maintaining a lot of different applications that may not all be written in Angular, web components and building web component libraries is a really robust way to go. But then to take a web component that represents some sort of form element and integrate that with your EO application can be a little tricky, but all completely possible just with the Reactive Forms API. We can also look at creating forms based on a JSON structure. And we can also access a parent form group across components or routes. So for those times that you're building like a multi-step wizard for some sort of form, how do you access everything that you need inside of a form group without getting those pesky errors of, oh, cannot locate this form control? So to tackle some of these scenarios, we need to get our Form Archaeology 101 course under our belt. We really need to understand what's going on. So we've got a couple basics here. First, we have our form control, which is our basic building block for creating an input, a radio, select, whatever. All this does is it creates a form control that's going to have a value and a validation status, among other properties and things like that. But this is kind of our core piece of information that's going to represent a key value pair and maybe the data that we're going to submit to an endpoint. We have form groups, which are groups of form controls. We have form arrays, which is an array of form control. I feel like this hangs a lot of people up when they're not quite sure how to deal with creating dynamic form groups or form controls. So that's available for us. One little hidden treasure that I like to point out when I'm talking about the Forms API is pretty much all of these inherit from this abstract class, or this base abstract class called abstract control. So a lot of times what I like to do is I'll just have this page up in the Angular documentation on the website. And so I can go and click through and really quickly see any properties that are available across this, any different methods that I might want to deal with that are available in this abstract control. So like I mentioned, with our form controls, we really care about a value and a validity, but there are other things that we might care about too. For instance, whether it's disabled, if it's pending, if it's been touched or interacted with. And we also want to be able to know when our value changes or when our status changes, because a lot of times when we're building dynamic pieces with controls that play together, we need to track those things. So for instance, a form control has a value changes observable that you can subscribe to that will emit anytime that value changes on that form control. Same with status changes. If it changes from valid to invalid or vice versa, there's an observable that we can subscribe to. So all sorts of great methods at your disposal here, just if you're aware of what's going on with them. So the abstract control class is your best friend. This is your guide to all things forms, and I would recommend getting quite comfy and familiar with it. It's also important to be aware of the ng control status and ng control status group directives. I mentioned these briefly earlier, but this is the directive that's going to apply classes like ng valid, ng invalid, ng pending, ng pristine to your form control or your form element, depending on what you're using, to display some of these classes, because there are a lot of times that we're going to want to show different user interaction. Instead of having to manually add classes or do all these checks for us, we can rely on Angular's native behavior and really understand how to hook into that to display what we want. And then we have validation. This is another big part of Form Archaeology on 101. One of the biggest mistakes I see is developers not understanding what's available with them with Angular validation and then going and writing their own system. And it's just a lot of work that you don't have to do and then maintain. So we have basic required validation, which is where we initialize a form control. And we can just call validators.required to say, hey, this is required. It does need to have a validator. There are other validators at our disposal. Like I mentioned, we have an email one. We also have max length and patterns. So be sure to check out what validators are already available to you before setting out to write your own and save yourself some time. We have pattern validation. So if you're having to deal with a pesky regex, maybe you need a date formatted in a specific time for form control. You can use the validator's pattern function for that, where you just pass in your pattern name. The example on the bottom is my preferred method, especially if I'm dealing with regexes, is I like to give it an appropriate variable name so the developer behind me can kind of understand what's going on. It's not like written in ancient Egyptian or anything like that. And then I pass in that variable name to the validator's pattern function, and it's very clear and readable to understand exactly what we're validating against. We also have function validation. So if you ever have a time where you have some sort of control and it needs to be within, like, let's say a range of values, and you need to do some sort of comparison on the fly where you can't just pass in like a static pattern or something like that, you can actually do function validation where you have a bit more control for your comparisons, and they can return errors based on whether it meets whatever functionality is there. So this, again, all built in and available to you with the Reactive Forms API. And so that's a good basic understanding. But if we really want to be great Angular form archaeologists, we definitely need to take our Form Archaeology 102. And these are some even better things that we can understand and be aware of to know how to write better forms. So the first thing is there are a couple different form utilities at our disposal. The first one is our form control name. And this ties a DOM element to the form control by its name. So a lot of times I will see people that they have their base form group object, and they'll call like, form group.controls to access the controls inside of that. And then the next key, like whether it's a form group or a form group name, they'll pass that in. We can just use form control name, which will accept a string, and then it will look in whatever its parent form directive is, to try and find the form control associated with that name. So this can save us a lot of time and energy. We also have form group name, which does the exact same thing, except instead of looking for a form control, it's going to look for a form group, as well as form array name. So if we're dealing with an array and maybe we want to have validation based on that, we can use the form array directive to say, hey, okay, inside of this form group that we're dealing with, find a form array element by this name that we're passing in. And finally, we have form builder. And this is just a shorthand syntax for creating form controls in anything you want. So you can import this, and instead of having to say like new form control every time, you can do this .form builder and then pass it in some options, and it'll understand what's going on there. So when we talk about using like form control name and form group name, this is an example of how it can help you. So in this example, we have an array called flowers, and then in this for loop, we're iterating over these flowers, and for each flower, we want to display a form control that's the type and the color. So you might see something like this, where, okay, we know flowers is a form array, and so we're going to get all the controls out of that and iterate over those. Well, the cool thing we can do here is we can go ahead and use the form group directive and tie that to flower. And so we can use the form control name, and it's going to say, okay, get a form control name of type inside of this form group. And so you don't have to do all this repetitive typing here. So great ways to do more readable code that's all built in for you. One of the other things I want to mention, because I, again, feel like I see a lot of people writing a lot more code than they have to, is we can use these form name directives, because what happens is when you tie that directive to a DOM element, whether it's just like a div, in this case, I've got this form group called villager info. It's going to track the validation status of everything inside of that directive. So inside of this form group, if any of the controls is invalid, that ng invalid class is going to get applied to that parent level wrapper that you see that I kind of have surrounded in the red dots, and then for everything below there. So understand that you can do a lot of UI manipulation just by binding things appropriately using directives to display the information that you need. And a quick example of form builder, this is kind of what some of that syntax looks like, where we go in ahead and we import our form builder. And then instead of having to type out, new form array, new form group, new form control, you can create a structure very quickly like this. So some pretty sweet utilities that we can use to really make great things happen without having to write a lot of additional code, just by having a really good understanding of the Reactive Forms API and how we can utilize it. And then finally, for the experts in form archaeology, we've got some form super elite hacks. And one of these is the control value accessor, and the other is control container. Control container technically comes from just the forums module, but I like to mention it because you can do some really cool stuff with it. So the control value accessor, if you're not familiar with, creates a bridge from DOM elements to form controls. So if you've ever been in a situation where maybe you're dealing with a third-party library and they don't support reactive forms, and you're trying to figure out how to deal with like combining ng model with a reactive form control, what you can do is create a wrapper component that implements the control value accessor interface. And essentially when your third-party component like makes a change, let's say it's a type ahead and there's a selection event where they've selected the item, then you can use the change value method on your control value accessor interface to emit that value to your form control, instead of having to wire up your own event emitters and everything like that. The control value accessor interface looks like this. It has 3 required methods that you need to implement, and then it has an optional set disabled state method. So the right value method is going to change anytime the form control value changes. So if you're needing to update your component to reflect that, you can hook into this function. We've got our register on change function, which is going to essentially emit our change value. And then we have a register on touched, because we want to know whether a user has interacted with our control a lot of times for just validation purposes and displaying. And then with our set disabled state, this function will be called whenever a form control is enabled or disabled. And so if you need to display anything, that's how that's done. All right. So it's actually cool to know that the control value accessor sounds a little scary, but these directives are actually built in, and this is what Angular is using under the hood. So you can see the selector here, where they're actually looking for this form control name directive. They're using this to actually implement their default value accessor to create these. So it's kind of cool to understand that this is really how things are happening under the hood. And the control container is a base class for directives of registering instances of ng control. So this is a great way to be able to kind of combine different form groups and connect them together without, again, having to use event emitters. So a couple recipes I want to talk about with like my last couple minutes left. I mentioned that one of the difficult things we deal with is input requiredness based on other inputs. And so all these things are built into the reactive forms API that we can use with the value changes observable of our form control. We can use a set validators method to change the validation required for a form control as things change. And we can also call update value and validity. And so that's going to retrigger change detection to evaluate the form control and display any relevant classes. We can handle custom validation by getting comparison values. We can create our own validation functions that maybe take the value from a form control and compare to determine whether it's valid or not, and then pass these validators around to our different controls. We can add and remove inputs dynamically as needed. That form array has a couple different methods. It's got a push and insert and a remove at method that'll allow us to remove and add form controls to our array. We can create form control or reusable form elements, like I mentioned with the control value accessor, where we can make sure to wire up our register on change and register on touch methods and have those act as normal form elements in the DOM. We can also use this approach for dealing with third-party web component libraries. And we can also actually create forms dynamically based on JSON just by understanding how our form groups, our form arrays, and our form controls work, and then creating dynamic structures from iterating over those. And then we can use the access form group across components by using the control container. So I've got the slides available online for you here. I know this was a very quick run through, but these are available at Hidden Secrets Form APIs .jenniferwoodella.com. And if you have any questions, definitely post them in the Slack channel. I know that was a lot of content coming at you, but I believe I will be available for a Q&A session in a little bit as well. So I hope you have a great rest of your conference and a lovely rest of your day, you wonderful humans.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So everyone, you're welcome to join us at the Zoom rooms for a Q&A session. And this is actually our last talk for today. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for that awesome talk. And
Thanks for having me.
I'm guessing good morning, not good evening, or you're like, where are you right now? What time is it over there?
Oh, I'm in Central. It's 1 o'clock and I am starving.
Bon appetit, I guess.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Time.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining our English track for today. I hope you all got a chance to find enough scavenger hunt codes and enjoyed our talks. And so I'll see you all tomorrow at 6 p.m. Israel time. That's GMT +2. And thank you again for all the amazing speakers who were here today, and of course to our amazing audience. Bye.